it's young Rick. Welcome to Eastside level. Oh, what? You thought this was Westside level? Nah, nigga, this Eastside level. No, I'm just playing. Welcome to Westside level. So, this is part 3 of the mixing masterclass, and today we're gonna go over the concept I want to go over is brightness. Fixing harshness in the mix, and then also fixing muddiness in the mix. So, just to give a definition of both of those terms, when I'm saying harshness in the mix, I mean when the high frequencies of our mix, like hi-hats, claps, even sometimes the high ends of our instruments, clash. Whenever those frequencies clash together, because remember we're bussing and grouping everything together, I'm gonna try to pay attention to that and clean up some of that harshness on the high end. Now the same thing with the low end when we're dealing with elements like bass, kick drums, even some lower end percussion. Those low end elements, the frequencies can sometimes clash. So what we're gonna do is pay attention to, and when those frequencies clash, that's what I refer to as muddiness. So what we're gonna be focused on in this master class is just we're gonna really pay attention to what's muddy and what's harsh. With that being said, welcome to part 3. Let's get into it. All right, so when we finished off with we started off with our drums. That was the first element of our bus compression, bus processing that we did, and we started off with some drum compression. Now, the reason I chose the drums is because emotionally, if you listen to the intro and then you go directly into the hook, the part that pops out to me the most is the drums. And to demonstrate that, I'll play it out real quick. So yeah, the drums to me, that's what really captured my attention when the hook came in. So that's the part of the mix that I really want to pay attention to and make real nice and pretty. So let's go back to this drum bus and get started on some processing after our drum bus compression. Now what I usually like to do after compression is add some saturation. Why do I choose to saturate after compression instead of before compression? Because from my perspective, I would rather shape the sound first and bring up all of those lower tones and then distort that, rather than distort a non-compressed signal that hasn't been shaped yet and then compress that. So it's just literally a preference thing. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my distortion, and I'm going to go ahead and pick the Elysia character mix version for this one. So what this gives us is a couple of types of distortion. I could keep it on the regular distortion, which is just some Class A mastering distortion, or I could change it to FET mode. What that does is it gives us a more tube-like distortion, so the distortion will be more aggressive. And then also there's a turbo mode that even gets more aggressive. But for this for these drums, I know I'm gonna probably deal with just either the regular mastering grade saturation or the FET. So let's go ahead and play with this and see what we get. All right, so I played around with it for a little bit. And for saturating the drums, I chose the FET style saturation. I just felt like since we want to make the drums stand out, we might as well go all in. And I like the way that the FET was making the drums pop out. As you can see, I drove it up to around 3. I took the color more to the left side because that represents more of our low frequencies. So you'll notice the kick drum popped out when I turned it more to the left. And then I just gain staged it real quick. So this is a quick before and after. This is before our distortion. This is after our distortion. All right, perfect. It's sounding really good. So let me go ahead and mute these keys real quick, and then I'm gonna go ahead and add an EQ to our drums, because now that we added all this compression and this saturation, it definitely took it gave a beating to our dynamics. So the thing that we use to restore dynamics is EQs. And I got a lot of cool EQs out here. So one of my favorite EQs to use on the drum bus is the Hitsville EQ, and I'll show you why. All right, and before we get into EQ, I do want to point out that I'm using the native version of the Hitsville EQ, not the UAD2. And the reason being is because the UAD2 plugins, because they're being ran through the Apollo, they do add latency to the prints. So if I I have to use the same amount of UAD plugins amongst all the channels that I want to print and to be cohesive. So with that being said, I'm using the native version. That way I don't force myself to have to use two UAD plugins on the bass and the key bus. And that's going to protect our latency for printing. And like I said, becoming a master at printing, this will open a lot of doors for you in the mixing world. So let's get straight into this EQ. All right, so basically what I did with this Hitville EQ is I added a 1 dB boost at around 50 hertz. Then I went to, because this represents the sub range. Then I went around 130, gave it a 2 dB boost. Now that's my trick. When you do this, give it around a 1 dB at 50 and a 2 dB at 130 on this Hitsville EQ. It's gonna make the kick drum pop out so much. And then also what I did is I cut out some 320, and that's going back into that concept of cleaning up some room so we don't build up mud, because I know that my 808 is going to live in that 300 range. I'm going to cut some of that out of my kick. So now what we're going to do is give this a quick before and after so you can hear how that sounds. So this is before we added our Hitsville EQ. This is after we added our Hitsville EQ. And that sounds amazing. Now, as far as drum bus, that's my processing. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next bus, which is our 808 bus. And we'll be listening in context at the mix. If we need to do anything more to the drums, we could do that through parallel processing, and there's much other ways to do. But for right now, we're going to move on to these 808s. The drums are sounding really good. When it comes to the 808, I am going to start the 808 off with some distortion. Now, unlike the drums, we're starting off with distortion instead of compression. Why is that? It's because the dynamics in an 808, for me at least, is less important when it comes to an 808. The dynamics are most important when it comes to drums and percussive instruments. The 808s can take a little bit more of a beating, so I'm not worried about the dynamics when I'm adding this saturation as the first stage to my 808. I'm more so focused on tone. So the distortion that I like to use on 808s is the Sound Toys what is it called? Devil Lock. Now, technically this is a compressor, but because this crush button is basically represents like a one knob compressor, and what this crunch knob represents is you overdriving it. So you basically you overdrive the crush until it goes into a second stage of it goes through a second stage of amplification through this unit. So what that does is add even more saturation, even more distortion, and it gets real nasty when you use the crunch knob. That's like running your signal through this unit twice, whereas the crush knob would be like just using the hardware as it originally was. So we're going to start off by distorting our 808 with the crush the crush knob, and if we need a little bit more, we'll go ahead and add some crunch and see if we can use that. All right, let's get into it. All right, now I don't want to make my 808 too powerful because remember, the drums are the star of the show in this mix. So we just going to keep it right there. I don't even think we're going to need to use our crunch knob, but this is a quick before and after. And yes, this unit did add gain, so we're going to have to gain stage through another plugin, but I just want you to hear the tone for now. So this is before. This is after. This is after. All right, so as you can see, we're getting somewhere with the 808. So now that we got the tone that we like for our 808, let's go ahead and add a compressor just for shape. So my go-to compressor when it comes to 808s is going to definitely be the 1176. I like the blue stripe version for 808s. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And basically what I'm going to start off doing with this one is I'm going to drive the input knob. Now also what you need to know about the input knob when it comes to 1176s is this is the stage of the compressor where the transformer or the distortion is. So when the more you drive the input of this compressor, you are going to get some saturation from it, but you're mostly going to get compression. So we're just going to drive our input till we see about like 1 to 3 dB of compression. I want to be real light with our 808. All right, now that I got my threshold sitting where I want it, I'm going to leave the attack where it is, but I'm going to speed up the release, and then I'm going to slow it down into, actually I'm going to slow down the release until it chokes the 808, and then back it off until I hear what I like. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Yeah, so right there in the middle of 3 and 5, I think that's the sweet spot for the release. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and use the output knob to gain stage us back to 18 dB, and then we're going to go ahead and do a before and after. It's done. Let's get a quick before and after going. So this is before we added our 1176 compressor. This is after our 1176 compressor. Very, very impressive sound. Very impressive sound. So the last thing we're going to go ahead and do with our bass is we're going to go ahead and add some EQ. So let's see what type of EQs we got available for the bass. All right, let's go ahead and just use the good old API EQ. All right, so now with this bass, I'm going to start off with, go ahead and do the 808 with the EQ, with the API EQ. The reason I'm pulling this EQ up is because I like the way the 300 boost sounds on the API. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this to give it a boost at 300. And we added that 300 boost with the API. Let's go ahead and let's gain stage it real quick. All right, so now that we have a gain stage, let's hear a quick before and after. This is before our 300 boost on the 808. This is after our 300 boost on the 808. So as you can see, it adds a lot of tone, a lot more tone. So now let's get into some cleanup EQ. The EQ I'm going to use to clean things up is going to go ahead and be our SSL EQ. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is, I remember that when we was dealing with our drums, I boosted at 50 hertz and 130. Now I want my 808 to be strong around that 50 hertz, that sub range, but that 130, that bass range, I feel like we can clean that up for the kick drum. So what I'm going to do is with this SSL, I'm going to take this low shelf, go around 130 and just knock it down a little bit. Perfect. So just cutting that, making that cut in the 808 made the drums pop out more. So I want you to listen for that when I do this quick A and B. This is before our cut at 130 on the 808. This is after. Listen to the drums. All right, so as far as that goes, I have the low end knocking exactly how I want to. There's nothing left to do except but to start processing these instruments. So let's go ahead and introduce those. All right, now the first thing I'm thinking I could do, the first thing I'm thinking I'm going to want to do with these keys is add some dynamic compression. And what do I use to do a dynamic compression? I'm going to go ahead and reach for the CLA 2A. And the reason why or not the, I'm sorry, not the CLA 2A, the LA 2A. But the reason why I'm reaching for this compressor is because the attack and release on this compressor is program dependent. It's dependent on whatever signal you feed into this compressor. So all you really have to worry about is the setting, the threshold, and then everything else just gives it a soft and very program dependent type compression. So what am I going to do here? I'm just going to drive this peak reduction meter until we get around 1 to 3 dB of reduction, because like I said, I want to be light with all this compression. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so what is this dynamic compression doing for our instrument bus? What it's doing is it's bringing up, because you got to remember, we grouped up all of our instruments and we leveled them very dynamic. The chord progression is louder than the arpeggio. The arpeggio is louder than the bells. So we have to, what this compressor is going to do is it's going to bring those lower level instruments closer to the level of the higher level instruments in a cohesive way that really groups it together, and that's what's known as glue. So this is my go-to compressor for glue. All right, so let's get a quick before and after going real quick. This is before we added our LA2A compressor. This is after we added our LA2A compressor. So as you can see, we added a lot of flavor with this LA2A compressor. It got our instruments nice and thick. So now what am I going to want to do when it comes to instruments? Well, we did destroy a little bit of the dynamics, so I do want to kind of restore that a little bit. And the EQ I'm going to use for that is going to go ahead and be our Muse EQ. Now, when it comes to instruments, especially me, because I play the piano a lot, what a lot of people don't realize is they can live all the way down to around that 100 range. So what I'm going to do is start off by checking this bottom bell right here and giving it a boost around the 100 range and see how that sounds. All right, so basically, what I did with the so basically what I did with the instruments, other than give it that 100, I boosted at 185. Then I went to the middle, gave it another boost at about 1K. That brought out a little bit more tone. And then when it came to the high shelf, I actually gave it a 1 dB cut, because I know that our hi-hats are living up there in that area. So around 2K, I gave it just a 1 dB cut. So now we made room for our hi-hats. We got some of the harshness out of the way. I think our instrument bus is done. So now that all of our tracks are done, we can go ahead and print all of our tracks and then move on to the next part of our session. All right, perfect. So we have the tracks printed. One thing I want to point out real quick is that with our drum bus, you can see that right at the beginning of it, we have this little annoying kind of distortion sound. That little That comes from the saturation plugin we put on the character plugin. Sometimes plugins again, when you're printing, they add dither, and sometimes they add a certain distortion. But because we printed it out, it's as easy as just cutting that out. And now we could play our prints, and this is how they sound as far as we got with the beat. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unarm our tracks. We can cut off all of these plugins that we used. And as you can see, that freed up a lot of CPU. Now we're going to go ahead and assign these prints that we did back to our mixer. We condensed all of this down to 3 tracks. So now we're dealing with just a drum bus, a bass bus, and an instrument bus. And what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to go ahead and take our drums and our bass, and I'm going to just group them to one. So now we're just dealing with the drums and the keyboards. All right, and the reason why I bust the drums and the bass together is because I'm going to use this as the last opportunity to just shave off some peaks with a compressor. So let's go ahead and see where we're sitting at real quick on this drum bass bus. All right, so we're sitting right under 9 dB. So I'm going to go ahead and to glue our drums and our bass together, I'm going to go ahead and use the Fairchild compressor. So let's go ahead and do that. And pretty much what I want to do is just get around 1 dB of reduction. I'm gonna do the time const. I'm gonna play with the time constants and see where I like it, and then I'm gonna go from there. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right. All right, so basically, I drove the the drums all the way into our Fairchild. That way, it gave us a lot of the tone of it. Then I got our thresholds where we're knocking around 2 to 3 dB. I gain staged, and this is a quick before and after. This is before we added the Fairchild into. This is before we added the Fairchild to our drum and bass. This is after we added the Fairchild to our drum and bass. Perfect. So yeah, that just gave us our little final little last input of density. So now that I did that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our actual mix bus, and let's do some mix bus processing. First thing I want to do with the mix bus is I want to go ahead and add a mix bus compressor. So the choice for today is I'm going to go ahead and just stick with the regular API. Just keep it simple, nice and simple. So what I'm looking for here is I'm going to go ahead and do a 2-to-1 ratio. I'm going to just start bringing that threshold down until I see some gain reduction. Then I'm going to play with my attack and release. All right, so after playing around, I ended up setting the attack around 10 milliseconds because it made the kick. If I drove it around 3, it started to choke the kick drum, and then the release around 5.5 5 milliseconds, or no, just 5 milliseconds, because around 5 is where it gave it some thickness, but we still kept the groove. So now that I got that going, let's get a quick and then I gave it a gain stage. So let's give it a quick A and B. So this is before we added our API. Oops. This is after we added our API. All right, so it's sounding really good. Let's move on to some mix bus saturation. What I'm going to use today is the black box. And you know, sometimes with these saturators, you don't even have to play with the knobs. I like to test out the saturation first and see if I like what it just adds. So we're just going to start off with a before and after. And if we like it, we'll move on. But let's hear how that sounds. So this is without the black box. And this is with the black box. Hey, you know what? I think that sounds good on its own. I'm not really even going to do too much tweaking. I'm going to just run our mix through the black box and then move directly on. So we're going to go ahead, and the last thing I want to do to this mix bus is I'm going to go ahead and use some EQ. And what this EQ is going to do is we're just going to bring out our last final touches. It's a two knob EQ, a low shelf and a high shelf. So I'm just going to give a dB at one of each, and I'm going to pick a specific frequency. So for the low shelf, let's see how it sounds when we boost at around 166, just to solid out all of our low end. All right, that sounds good. Now let's give it a high shelf, just to bring out those instruments, those hi-hats, just everything in that high range. Let's try to shoot for about 7.1K. I like that range. And as you can see, those two moves right there just made the mix pop out so much more. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a quick before after. This is before our EQ. This is after our EQ. All right, so that is a satisfying sound. Now, all right, so this track is ready for print, and we could move on to the master. So I'm gonna go ahead and print this sub mix real quick. All right, so as you can see, I have our let me get back to our playlist. I have our sub mix completely printed out. So now we're just dealing with one track. Let's go here, assign it to our mixer. Cut off all the plugins, and now we can go ahead and get some mastering started, or some quote-unquote mastering. I don't consider myself a mastering engineer, but let's go ahead and get into this. The first thing I'm gonna put on here is a visualizer. That's going to tell us what levels we're hitting. I don't have an exact target. I just like to know where it does hit when I bring it to level. Next, I'm going to add my L1 limiter. So let's go to the mastering plugins, L1. Then I'm going to just do the Pensado Boost preset. All that does is set my ceiling for me and bring the threshold down just slightly. Next, the thing I'm going to do to bring, the plugin I'm going to use to bring our mix to level is our Yase maximizer. And before I even touch any of the knobs on here, I'm going to set the ceiling on this to -3. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and loop the hook one last time. And then bring this track to level. All right, now our song is brought to level. Let's go ahead and check what that looks like on our meter.
Hey, it's Rick on them keys and them kicks.
All right, so as you can see, we're sitting around 16 short term, 17 long term. So that's good for beats because when it comes to the mastering, they can get it to whatever level they want. But this shows that the beat is nice, dynamic, and has room to put the vocals into it. So with that being said, the beat is completely finished. What you do from here is you go ahead and file. Let's make sure we unloop the hook. That way it prints our whole beat. File, export, MP3. So we're going to go to our beat catalog 2025 February. We're going to name this beat. It don't take me a long time to think of names. Go Time 2. That's what we're going to call the beat. Then we going to do that again. Go Time 2. That I created a folder for the beat. Now I'm actually naming the beat. Produced by Rick in parentheses. Then we're going to put the beat PM. That way it's very easy for the engineer to deal with. Save the MP3. Make sure it's all on the highest quality settings. Go and smoke a blunt. I'll catch you in a sec. All right, so now we have our beat fully exported. Just to show you that, I'll go on my desktop to my beat catalog, February. Go Time 2. All right, and I'm sorry. So catalog February, Go Time 2. You see that it's in my catalog. One last thing I want to show you before we get out of here is I also like to print the stems for the artist. That way I can completely delete the beat and anything else needed. It's just all in that folder. So what I do from here is I just go to File, Export, WAV file instead of MP3 this time. And then we're going to go to the desktop. We're going to go to February, Go Time 2. Then we're going to type in that name again. To save, make sure that split mixer tracks is enabled. Then we're going to go ahead and render. And that is the complete session. Once they rendered, everything will be in this folder and everything will be good. All right. I'm Young Rick. This is Westside Level. Go ahead, give me a like, subscribe, comment if y'all got any questions. This was the first mixing masterclass. I appreciate all of y'all for joining me. Y'all the niggas. Go ahead, change the world. I'm gone.